For joining today. The webinar around money matters is what we're calling it. But really, delving into our relationship with finances, how it impacts us, a way to reframe the conversation. And we'll do quick intros. Jason, if you want to introduce yourself, share a little bit of your background, and then I will share some on mine.
Sure. So Jason Shepard here, and as you can tell from the bio, I always hate doing this like community builder entrepreneur, but started as an entrepreneur and a real estate investor a little over a decade ago, and primarily to find financial freedom in business. And that's kind of evolved as my relationship with money has changed. So right now, most of my projects have to do with how we enter physical space, how we gather, how we build community in physical space, and how we optimize physical spaces. So, still very much operating different real estate businesses, but more so for like the we and the collective, more so than me and my financial gain.
Great. Thanks for that intro. And I'm Natalie. I'm the founder of She's Independent. We are a women's empowerment collective and community covering topics online and off to empower you through mindset, through, personal development, professional development, you name it. Really excited to be diving into this topic today. I actually had experienced a bit of a similar conversation with a community that Jason had started here in the Denver area, which was really interesting and really diving into how do we think about finances, how do we think about money. At She's Independent, we did a webinar a few weeks ago on the framework of personal finance. So today we're not diving into those topics, but we can share with you that recording, put you in touch with some resources if you want to dive into how to, come to financial freedom. But today what we're really talking about is more the mindset and how to appreciate what you have. So to move forward, I probably should have had this slide up. The intention today is really to talk about, how to feel rich or how to be rich where it's not dependent on money and finances. What does that mean? We'll get into it in more depth. But first, let's, just take a moment to think about why we are here today, why we each showed up. I can see from, a few of the participants that are live, some of you have financial backgrounds and some of you do not. So what is your context and how do you think about, wealth and money? Is it something that's a struggle for you? Is it something that you want to work on? I think there were a number of questions or things I put out to our audience, such as, how do you think about the power dynamic when it comes to dating? Who's paying? Are you in a role where you feel good about what you're doing and how you spend money? But just think for a second and, feel free if you ever want to type in the chat before we get to the Q&A later. We're always open to and interested in, why people showed up today. And so quick look at the agenda and what we're talking about. I won't speak too much to the slides given we may reproduce this as just an audio later, but we really want to talk about that framework. What is finance? What is personal finance? What is financial freedom? We could talk about it in terms of money, or we can talk about it in terms of, how we operate and live our lives. Appreciation, of course, is a financial term that you will often hear when it comes to making more money based on kind of interest rates or accumulation of wealth, but appreciating what we have and that concept of feeling really good about other things in our lives is something that we're going to chat about today. And then finally, maybe some tools and tips to help with your mindset, and then open it up to Q&A. Real quick, it looks like one of our participants did share some feedback on why she showed up. And she would like to learn how to improve her relationship. So thank you, Carol, for sharing that. Great. So to speak to frameworking or the framework of money and how we think about it, I think, Jason, feel free if you want to dive in, or I can, lead some of this. But basically, we'd like to run a quick exercise, which is, what do you think about when you think about money? A lot of people are going to come up with some negative connotations. So if you could close your eyes Take a few deep breaths. And as you're breathing, think about a large sum of dollars. Now, what words are coming to your mind when you think about this large sum of wealth? Keep breathing. What are the associations that come to you when you think about money? And now let's, come back to eyes open, thinking about, what were those associations? Jason, what's, something that you associate with money and wealth? And I realize that in this context, you've probably already done some self work there, but what's something that you associate with wealth?
Yeah, and I think this is a testament to me doing work on myself and my relationship with finance and wealth and money. In this exercise, I think of money as energy. I think it is an opportunity to be in service. If it was 5 or 10 years ago, I would have thought of it as a cool new item or a scoreboard or validation that what I was doing professionally was worth something and that I was smart enough or I worked hard enough. So, that exercise changes depending on the framework and how you actually are in relationship with money. And so, for me now, I look at it and that I think that first slide was really interesting when you say, how can you actually be rich without making more money? And I mean, if you look at it from a financial side, you can increase your revenue or you can decrease your expenses. And from this standpoint, like when you start having that relationship with money and being aware of those expenses no longer needing to be there. I no longer need to have the cool shiny thing to prove that I worked hard enough or I'm good enough or I'm smart enough or it's a scoreboard and I'm competitive and that's what I see money as. So as you start kind of realizing that that threshold of like what you desire starts going down, you start making really nice traction towards financial freedom and towards that threshold of feeling like you are internally rich.
Yeah. And it looks like Davis put in the chat that for him, he thought about more tools so that he could do good for his family and his community. When I first did this exercise, I thought security, I was thinking of, maybe not great connotations. I was thinking of accumulation or almost like a fear where it's like, okay, you have money. Now what do you do with it? Or you need more. Carol had mentioned, she's not connected to finances. She's not connected to money. So it's interesting when we dive into ourselves internally and we say, hey, what is that relationship? As we start having this conversation going a bit deeper, realizing that, surface level or in our society, a lot of people think of wealth or money as security. It's within the framework that we've built, but it's not necessarily the case, right? You have so many things to give to your community and yourself where it's not really about dollars, even though we're kind of trained to think that way. So I think there's a lot of work that we can each individually do to say, well, how do we appreciate and how do we not just make everything about money? Even though you go out, you want food, you want something, right? We're not on a barter system. We operate today in a society that is very dominated by money flows. So I think you brought up a really interesting concept, Jason. You spoke to money as energy. So maybe if you could spend a minute or so talking about that. I'm curious for the listeners out there and even for myself, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, and I think part of it, you mentioned the word accumulation, and like for me, accumulation, if you look at it from money or from energy, there's really not a great storage mechanism for energy, right? So in a situation where you want to continue to look at your money as energy and putting it out into the world and helping finance other projects you believe in, voting with your dollars for each product that you buy that is really really speaks to you or resonates with you. So like if we start looking at our relationship with money as not a I need to store it in a bank account for as long as possible, but it's energy that flows through me. I'm a steward of this money, and I'm going to find the pathways to actually let that energy and that money flow through me. So it's been an interesting kind of pivot for me in my relationship when I started looking at it from energy and not this accumulation. How can I have compounding interest? How can it be sitting in my account? And making sure that I had this bulk sum that gave me financial freedom and gave me that sense of security. I mean, that's changing a mindset where you're going from scarcity to abundance, because when you're in scarcity, I want to accumulate as much as possible because I never know when the other shoe's going to drop. And if you actually take the approach that it is energy and it will, in an abundance fundamental, it will backfill. That's just a very different use of how you actually deploy your capital when you start looking at it from kind of that framework.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's all, a really great way to think about it. And moving on to, how money's impacting us, you're starting to get into some of these thoughts. How do we, how are we operating before we ask ourselves these questions and before we kind of relearn the framework? We really do have that scarcity mindset. That's something that's kind of embedded in us from, hey, you only have these many dollars. How can you spend it? From a young age, or, when you're looking to go out on your own, or, find an apartment, or, buy lunch, whatever it is, right? It's, you have a certain amount of dollars, or, something costs a certain amount. So we have kind of been trained to use money, with that mindset of, hey, it's, we're looking to accumulate it. We want more. That's going to allow us to be happier, or basically live a better life. But you brought up a really important concept, which is the concept of money as energy where it flows. So investing or using it with intention, being conscious for how you are actually using it and feeling good about whether it's purchases or putting it towards an organization where you feel it's very aligned with kind of your soul mission. These are ways to change the conversation and to make it not about, scarcity, but about how do I actually put it towards things that I feel really good about. So I think, you and I chatted offline before this about how you make purchases that are a lot more mindful today. Can you speak to that to the audiences? I think that's kind of a fascinating concept.
Yeah, so I think what's really interesting about this is, as much as I look at money as energy, I know fundamentally how my mind works is I have this very quick due diligence and underwriting mindset from a financial side where I can be very intentional and notice that I'm deploying my capital in something, and I feel very comfortable that I'm very aware of what that opportunity looks and feels like, because that's just I risk reward every decision through the last 12 years of investing into assets and operating businesses. So there is a bit of like an asterisk next to that to make sure you're saying, well, this seems like it's in alignment and I'm going to put all my money there. I mean, you still have to be smart in understanding how you're spending your money. And fortunately for me, I have the ability to quickly underwrite, different opportunities and say that is a good use of my dollars. And for me, it's changing a lot of my spending habits. I mean, I was very much on the, conspicuous consumption mindset. I would have a bunch of, expensive products or cars, and that kind of stuff like really doesn't resonate with me anymore. And even buying, consumer goods, I want it to have a story. I want it to be handmade. I want it to be upcycled. I want there to be something that's interesting around it. So really, almost every single decision I make is financially something that I say, is this going to move energy towards something that I'm in support of and that's aligned with me? And when you can start being super intentional with each dollar you spend, but realize that I'm kind of doing the underwriting very quickly just because I have a lot of practice in that. So that's been part of me kind of changing how I actually look at my purchases and saying each time I'm making a purchase, I want to make sure I'm thinking about that purchase and just being very mindful of that.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really important concept, which is, a lot of people today talk about concepts like, manifestation, and they say, oh, like, I want money, I'm going to put that out there, or I'm going to throw money at something and it's going to come back at me. But I think what Jason's pointing out, which is, a really important piece to be aware of, is that he has a financial background. He has a business background. I do as well. So if I put money towards something, I also know and can understand the risk reward on that. I think working with a financial advisor or somebody that has business savvy is really important when it comes to where are you putting your investment dollars. That being said, as consumers, we don't have to have a sophisticated business mindset to say, I'm going to, purchase things that I feel good about. Maybe I really like fair trade or women-run businesses out of Africa. To be able to spend those dollars in what you feel are meaningful ways, that's something that is really fulfilling, and that's something that you can really feel good doing.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah,
it is, even is one of those things where like there's a life insurance mechanism for a savings and like to generate some sort of baseline revenue through this mechanism. And this guy's pitching me, hey, you should have some dollars in kind of this safe here. And I'm just so not interested in that, right? So like there's an element of that as well to say, yeah, I understand the common sense behind, storing some of your financial, having a savings account and building towards the future. But I also want to be interested in stuff that I'm spending my money on. So, it's how can I be intentional both of the impact of the product that I'm buying or the people that are using the money, but also like, I want to be like inspired. I want to be interested. I want to have fun with what I'm doing. I want it to be around experiences. So there's also part of kind of setting how that relationship works and how you actually can use that to make sure that whatever you're doing, you're inspired by.
yeah. And there's one other concept I want to talk about on this slide, which is on relationships. Thinking about how money and how finances impact us, let's say in the dating world, right? You and I chatted about this also, before we connected for this webinar, but basically how awkward or, what is that dynamic when you're paying for a date, right? I know that myself, personally, I've always wanted to lead with the foot of, hey, I'm financially independent. I don't want to, owe anything, or I want to show my worth. So I, as a woman, probably pay more than almost any woman you've met, whether it's 51% or, covering, bills sometimes. How do you think about picking up the check or, splitting a check, and how does money and finance really interact with your personal relationships in your dating life?
Yeah, I mean, this is so interesting because it's a dating life, but it's as well as friendships. And, for me, I love treating. I mean, I've been very fortunate to be able to have, some nice financial success. So I love, and that's one of probably my love languages to actually like give gifts and treat people. But I think there's a shadow to that, right? I mean, me wanting to pick up every tab starts almost being, it's spilling thunder from someone at the other side of the table that says, no, I want a treat. I also get joy from doing something like this. It's also one of those things that, me doing the math in my head and assuming that I probably have the financial means more so than anyone at the table, and doing that is almost, it's something that actually doesn't serve the collective group that's sitting there, because they feel almost, put down that I take care of it, or they're not, able to have it. And it's almost like this subconscious bragging. So like there's so much dynamic that goes into that, just picking up the check at a dinner, which is so interesting. And it's something for me that I've actually started to take a back seat and say, no, thank you. That's great. I'm happy that you can treat for that.
Yeah.
And that's part about changing my relationship with money. Everyone at this table that could pick up this check can do it, and it's not going to put anyone out. We're all equally rich. So there's no need for me to have this ranking game of I should be picking it up or I want to treat. So it's really one of those kind of real life experiences and case studies that we get to realize how much money and the whole narrative that we've been programmed are part of our day-to-day life.
Yeah, and I have to say, I mean, I read a great article the other day on, specifically dating and I guess the male female dynamic around picking up the check. And I mean, at the core of it, right? It's like we've gone through different waves of, say, feminism, right? And by not showing up and by not being a part of and even splitting the check, what is that saying, right? What is that saying about the power dynamic? What is that saying about who you attract? So I would say, something that I've really enjoyed is becoming more balanced and, investing in not just the masculine, but the feminine, and realizing that you're going to attract and you're going to interact with others in a way that serves you in a much healthier and also just more exciting way if you can be more well-rounded. So I think working on that balance for all of us, if you make less money, like by showing up and by putting something on the table, you're going to feel better. You're going to feel more confident, realizing that all of us have something to work on, is a really important point. So moving on to the concept of appreciation, and we've chatted on this a little bit. Earlier somebody in the chat had said, I want to, maybe have money so I can support others, or do things for my family. You'd mentioned, hey, that your love language might have been gifts. But in truth, right, if you look at real wealth, if you look at, let's say happiness as a barometer, where people have run these studies, globally, in the States, where we are arguably one of the most wealthy, if not the wealthiest, country by many standards, we actually aren't happy a lot of the time. And what that comes down to is wealth isn't, finances alone, right? It's actually in many times, community, it's love, it's appreciation. So let's talk about these concepts, right? Like, let's talk about quality over quantity, which is something that you brought up the other day. And how do we, start to change that mindset from scarcity to appreciation? How do we start to change that narrative?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it starts with a lot of personal development and a lot of self-work, because really you're kind of unpacking all the programming of what money is and what you've been told through your parents, your clergy, your school, your friends, the media. I mean, there's just so much impact that goes into the maturation of like your own operating system, and a lot of which we didn't even like think through. It's just been programmed to us. So for me, that really was a whole process where, when I was 24 years old, my monthly overhead, because of my expenses and what I needed to survive, was $20,000 a month. I mean, if I would have continued at that trajectory as far as understanding what my lifestyle or what I wanted in this world, and took it to where I am right now, I mean, I couldn't imagine. It would probably be, I'd need millions of dollars a year to just break even. So it's something that you can get wrapped up in very, very quickly. And, when you can start kind of doing the self work and going inward and saying, why do I want this item? Is that boredom? Is that, self-worth? Is that self-love that I'm giving by pampering myself? Like there's all of these ideas of, how you start kind of reworking what your inner relationship is for love. And for me, it was to identify that, money is energy, and that I actually want my money to be spent on experiences or quality. And I had no longer the attachment of like the nice watches or the really expensive bottles of wine or whatever it may be. I've got exactly what I need. So for me, that was part of it. And it all starts with each person starting to throw away and burn the stories that have been told to them, and start kind of building their own narrative.
Yeah, I think, self-work is something we should always be doing and investing in. And, over time, we're constantly figuring out who are we and how do we appreciate, let's say, like this stage of our lives. For me, I recently had a pretty big epiphany when I was going through some soul searching on, what's kind of my inner critic, or what is my inner voice telling me, and how is it guiding me? And I realized that, for so long in my life, I'd been kind of negative, or pretty negative, towards, let's say, finance, people in finance, people making a ton of money. And I used to do it, right? I worked on Wall Street for 5 years. I went into, tech investing. But ultimately, I kept having this attraction to numbers and data. And, I'm an engineer by background. I had, some financial framework. And what I realized was by accepting, who I was and some of my skill set, I could actually use that in a way to not only empower myself, but empower other, let's say, women or people that didn't have access to, that framework. And so realizing, wow, like now I can appreciate this skill set or this, basically, framework or investment in finance, if it's something that I can use for good, now it's a whole new realm that I'm kind of opening up for myself. So I guess, yeah, reframing, what is that conversation? What is that inner dialogue? But also realizing that reframing and not needing to accumulate or, think of maximizing wealth for happiness, like that's not a thing. That's something that maybe is instilled into us, but you can unlearn that. So realizing that you can have a healthier dynamic and a healthier relationship with money, that's something that, all of us can do. But I do think it takes a lot of work, living in a place like, the United States today.
For sure. And I mean, people have a lot of trauma around money. I mean, a lot of their parents' fights were around money. A lot of the family dynamic of the uncle that lost everything or the investment that they didn't really know about. And they, the grandparents that spoiled the gambling or like there's just a lot out there that is kind of programmed into our operating system. And no wonder that, majority of people kind of have this scarcity mentality when it comes to it. Cause it's like, what if it all goes away? I need it as my mechanism to survive in this world. So, I kind of understand that and why that's really ingrained into our DNA for a survival standpoint. But I think it's healthy for each person to do the work and realize which of those truths are them wanting to make sure that they feel somewhat secure and which are just compounded stories of like scarcity mindset that are not serving them anymore.
Yeah. And I think that past generations, that idea of needing financial security was something that was so ingrained where, I'm excited today that we're having these conversations, right? We're kind of opening up and saying, let's do this work that I think was tougher to do in prior generations when we didn't have, let's say, the means or even the framework of you grow up in a place where you don't have to walk, 5 miles to go to school. We've all heard the stories. But basically we have more time. And so what do we do with that time? What do we do with, our health, given what science and technology have provided us with, right? Now we have washing machines. We have things that, we're not slaving away as much as we used to. So what does that mean? Hopefully we're investing in kind of our mindset, unlearning some things that maybe weren't healthy and, being able to pave the way for what is that life that we really want. So let's move on to, how are we aligning spend with what we really want in life? And you've spoken to this a little bit. But I think that, we can speak to it in a little bit more detail, which is, what are we doing with our dollars? And I'll bring up even the example I spoke to a few minutes ago, which is, how can I be more intentional, realizing that I have a financial framework, I've spent time in finance, and sure, for many years I tried to get away from it. But more recently I realized, wow, I can actually take some of these dollars and I can get involved with and start investing so that there can be maybe a woman on that board or a female investor, alongside what I'm looking at right now, which is maybe, a group of men. So for me, I actually got really excited when I said, wow, I can actually take some capital. I can take some of this money and I can do something that feels really good and really healthy. That being said, right, money could be interchangeable with time. It could be interchangeable with energy. So you don't need, the $5,000 or $10,000 to invest in that deal. You could be doing other things where it's not about capital. But I like to bring up that example because it's something that I started doing where it does have to do with dollars, but I feel really good about it. And it's something that I'm really excited about.
For sure. Yeah. And I think it's interesting. I mean, I've seen, some of the spends I've made recently are about like, hey, I want to remodel this space, not for me. I live in 550 square feet, but I want to remodel this space and spend my own dollars because it's going to be a community room for Archipelago, which is a social community here in Denver. And I want it to be remodeled, and I want people to come here and enjoy it. And like, so for me, that's a spend that's completely aligned. It's building community. It's something that I know I can actually monetize in the future by actually renting out the space to different people that want to utilize it. There's going to be people that go into that space and do breath work for the first time and have a breakthrough in personal development. There's going to be people that meet for the first time and they share that was their meeting point before this unbelievable romance or whatever that may be. But that's where I want to spend my dollars, right? So if I'm going to spend $100,000 remodeling this space, so it's going to be a hub for community and growth and those items, like I'll spend every dime I have on elements that just are so fulfilling for me, rather than saying I could go buy a fourplex in Phoenix because we have an office down there and it will yield better. So when we start underwriting like what is overall yield, and I think you alluded to it when you said, okay, it could be happiness, it could be like the sweat equity people are putting in as far as their equity, but like what's the overall impact? Because really we only have the financial tools to measure impact in like a yield scenario, when the impact is how many people actually had their met their best friend or their wife or husband or had a breakthrough and are a better version of themselves because of that. Yeah, I can't really quantify that the return on my investment, but I know like energetically and from an aligned perspective, that's the kind of stuff that I want to be spending all my money on.
Yeah, and I would also say with She's Independent, we are, less than a year in and we are not making money. I'm bootstrapping it, which means I'm investing, and I just did my taxes and I've lost some money, but I'm very happy to do it. It's very aligned with what I want to be doing today in my life. We are basically a social impact organization, and we're really just looking to have awesome dialogue and invest in ourselves and invest in our community. And to be able to spend those dollars towards something I'm really passionate about feels awesome. And it's also really helped me in kind of my journey of personal growth as well. So, I'd do it all over again and I'd spend 10x what I already did. So I'm really excited about it. And I think those are great examples where we're, investing in community and we have dollars to do it. But I also know that we're both spending our time, which is another form of dollars, our energy, again, another form. And, I'm really excited about that.
Yep.
Awesome. So we've covered, I would say, a good amount, and we kind of, ran through it because we could talk about this all day long, but there are just a ton of concepts, and we wanted to introduce the framework. We wanted to talk about how to, reframe that perspective. And, we wanted to get some resources in front of you. Sometimes it's planting the seeds so that, in a week or tomorrow or next year, you realize, oh, wow, I've, reframe the conversation. Bring this back to your community, have this conversation, with us offline, with your friends, feel free to ask the questions. I think this is really just kind of starting that conversation. A few resources that, Jason actually had mentioned, and I recently read The Soul of Money by Lynn Twist, which was a pretty good book. And then you'd mentioned Emily Price, so I mentioned it to the audience as well. That was something that I believe you said, Jason?
Yeah, actually, I don't know if I've read Emily's work, but like Charles Epstein has some really Sacred Economics is another really good read on this. It's a little more ethereal, but yeah, I mean, there's resources out there that really start kind of flipping the entire framework of how we treat money. Yeah, and Soul of Money was also another good read.
Awesome. And so that brings us to live Q&A. I know we've had a few people ask questions or, share comments throughout. Feel free, if anything's come to mind, we're happy to chat about it now. And as I said, it may be something that you sit on and you have questions in the future, and we'd be happy to hear from you. So feel free if you have anything and you want to share it in the chat. And if you don't have any questions, I would just say thanks so much for joining us today. Really important topic, aligning with what makes you happy and, figuring out how to spend your time and energy and dollars, all, really fascinating stuff. So it looks like Davis mentioned, enjoyed the personal backgrounds and talking about the money bias journey. Davis is also interesting because he is a financial advisor. So I think he, really has a deep framework and in many ways thinks about wealth accumulation for his, people that he's working with, but also realizes that there's a bigger vision out there and a bigger, thing to appreciate. And then Carol is sharing, can you say anything about the aspect of receiving when it comes to that relationship with money? I'm going to think on that for a second.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, actually, because, and it depends on a lot. This is all about how you actually relate to money and your self worth. And I think there's been times in my life where there was, I was receiving a large sum of money through like a deal that we had exited or something like that. And there's a lot of emotions that get attached to that. There's a level of like, do I really deserve this? Now, is this an obligation that I need to actually move forward? And like, so, it's been something that like, for me, that I'm a steward of that gift. I'm a steward of that energy. So for me, if I treated each dollar as a gift that I wanted to be so grateful for receiving, and then on the other side of that, quickly give that gift to someone else, it makes that receiving a little bit easier because I can just be present and be accepting and very grateful for that gift that I received. And I think a lot of times it was almost like guilt at certain times, or even some obligation that I felt like, oh my gosh, now what am I going to do with this? I got to go find another deal. So it's, just like anything else. I mean, how you show up in this world and how you receive, a lot of things is very similar to probably how you act when you receive a gift or money.
Yeah, something I didn't speak to earlier, but is very much aligned with this question is I did inherit a little bit when we lost my mom about a year ago. And that was really tough. And there was, guilt attached, but also realizing that with that energy and with those resources, then I was able to take time and to heal and then ultimately do things like start She's Independent, where I know my mom would be the biggest fan. It feels really good. And so being able to appreciate those gifts, and I think receiving is, by the way, a wonderful feminine concept, right? Giving versus receiving, we want to do both. But the art of receiving and really appreciating, whether it is monetary or whether it's something else, it's something that you definitely want to work on. It's something that I've worked on. It's something that maybe doesn't come naturally to a lot of us, but that feminine kind of receiving is really important to be able to accept and appreciate.
Yeah. When I kind of changed that framework, when I treated it as a gift, it was, it made the receiving process seem a bit easier for me.
Great. Well, thanks so much, all. If we don't have any more questions, it looks like we might be winding down. And I would just say, if you have any interest in, furthering the discussion, our community, which is online and off, she'sindependent.com, would be really excited to chat with you further.